So you've decided to start a studio, you've asked why you want to start a studio, you've asked what kind of studio you want to make and what kind of games you want your studio to produce, and you've asked who you are, the skills you bring, and the skills of the team that you're building around yourself. You've bounced back and forth with those questions, and now you're getting to the final 3 questions. These are more tactical, so we'll tackle them all together. Those are when, where, and how. So when is about asking when the game is going to come out. What's your burn rate? How long can you afford to keep going like this? If you set your when too far in the future, then you run the risk of your game becoming outdated or losing relevancy. This is a bigger deal for larger games. If you're a small indie darling, then you don't really age out. But once you get into the larger indie space, and certainly as you get into AAA, a game that was supposed to come out in 2010, coming out in 2015, is going to look older. And it potentially gets you onto this treadmill of constantly having to update yourself. Considering how long you want to give yourself for your game is a pretty important thing to do, because this is pushing back against who to some degree. Smaller teams are easier to manage and they will pull in the same direction more effectively, but they have less pulling power. So you're trying to balance out the size of the team to get it done in a timely manner, but no bigger than that, so that you are allowing yourself to control the size and scope of the team that you're dealing with and managing as much as you can. Before 3 years ago, I'm not entirely sure I would have even put where on the list of questions that you would ask, because at the time it seemed fairly obvious from my perspective that the answer to this question would be in a single location, maybe if you have to be in 2 locations, but no more than that. But these days, the landscape is totally different. You can choose to have a physical location and have most of your people be in the same city. But these days, in a post-COVID world, or a during COVID world, we have seen a complete shift in the expectation of people in creative spaces about how they work. Chances are, if you're starting a studio these days, unless you want to take a very hardline stance, you're going to be either online only or hybrid. Personally, I'm not a big fan of a hybrid scenario because I think it's going to lead to discrepancies between different people, and it just inherently is unjust. Because what you'll have is that some people are gathering together in meeting rooms and some people aren't. The people gathering together are going to have advantages in terms of communication. So for me, I believe that you should really ideally be choosing between online only or mostly in a physical location. But there are studios successfully doing hybrid work, so that is also an option. If you are going to have office space, either because you're doing a physical primary studio or because you're going hybrid, then you are going to have expenses around office space. So this is going to increase your burn rate, and it does go back and inform your when question because you've gotten a lot more expensive. That being said, if you don't have a physical location, then you are putting the burden of support tasks around keeping people's computers working on the employees themselves, or you're requiring some sort of methodology to support them in the field. So that is a burden as well, though it's likely a lot less than the cost of the rent of your physical space. As part of asking the where questions, ask yourself how you're going to deal with this. What are your communication tools going to be? Are you going to use Slack or Discord? Are you going to use Zoom? How are you going to keep the team cohesive? You aren't going to be able to do company meetings in a physical way if you are either hybrid or online only. So what are you going to do to build culture in a world where people aren't seeing each other on a day-to-day basis? This is something to consider now as you're starting to form the foundation of your new studio. And then finally, how are you going to work? This is some very tactical things like what engine are you going to use? Are you going to use outsourcing or buy things off the asset store? What platforms are you going to make games for? How are you going to monetize your game? The answer to engine and platform and monetization are going to go back and inform your who answers. as well as, to some degree, your what answers as well. If you are making games just for the mobile phones, then the what is different than if you are making games only for current gen consoles. So decide what platforms you're going to support, how you're going to make money. If you're going to be free to play or a live service, you are going to need to consider the fact that you're going to, for a very long time, have a team assigned to this game, supporting it and growing it and changing it in order to make money out in your tail. Consider that. That's going to, again, affect your who. What does your structure look like? What do your processes look like? How are you going to have people report? Are they going to report into their discipline? Are they going to report into a producer? Are you going to have producers? How many producers for your overall team size? How are you going to do approvals? How are you going to structure your work? And what tools are you going to use to do this? Are you going to use Jira and Slack or Discord for everything? How are you going to structure the studio itself? Some of the questions in how are really just nuts and bolts and aren't going to inform the other questions. But a lot of these questions are going to force you to re-examine the what and who of the kind of people you need and the kind of games you're going to make. And potentially, if enough of this changes underneath you, the answer to these questions about when and where and how might make you re-examine your why. Maybe once you've done all of this and thought about the game that you are capable of making, it is so different than the kind of thing that you wanted to make, that was the basis of your why, that you no longer actually want to start your own studio. This is why you want to keep that opening question in your mind. Because if you drift too far away from your original vision, is it still what you want? Is starting your own studio still something that gets you interested? Because it's gonna be a lot of work, and sometimes there are going to be compromises, and sometimes you're going to have to make things that maybe weren't exactly what you wanted to make. Are you okay with that? So always keep that why question open throughout this entire process. So now you've gone through all 6 questions, and you've probably reopened a few of these questions a couple of times as new information has come to light. Now you have something that can serve as the basis for what your studio is going to look like. You haven't started yet, you've just sort of drawn a rough shape of your space. These more tactical questions in this video, potentially you can answer along the way to some degree. When you have to be careful about, because if you don't have very much money, you need to know the answer to when before you start, or you're just going to run out of money one day and people aren't going to get paid. For things in the how category in particular, some of this can wait and be answered as you go. You can potentially start the process and then feel your way towards monetization strategies or platforms even. Better if you at least have a guess to start with, but to some degree, the way you answer some of these questions is by getting going. Hopefully I didn't scare anyone off that wants to start a studio, or maybe I did. Maybe I did scare you off, and maybe that's a good thing. It's useful to ask yourself if you want this, really, or if it's just something that seems a lot easier than it actually is. A lot of us have a tendency to treat things as being easier than they are when we don't fully understand them. So it's important when we're going into something that's going to be this big of a deal that we try to understand it a little bit better and not just jump into the deep end and potentially drown. Though sometimes there's something to be said to being forced to figure out how to swim. Sometimes great things are made by people that don't know any better. So if you still want to start your own studio after asking these questions, or you listen to me and you don't even want to answer these questions, then all I can say is good luck. Video games are hard. I hope you make something amazing. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. If you found this video interesting, give it a thumbs up because that will tell YouTube that it's worth sharing to other people. We have merch now. If you're interested in picking some of that up, there's a shelf below this video where there should be some merchandise listed. That also helps the channel out. Are you going to run off and start your own game studio? Is it because of what I said? Is it in spite of what I said? Did I scare you off? Let me know these things down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.